Why is it that when you start talking about Black history in America and you mention the fact of how Black people came to America as slaves, kidnapped from their own country, a bunch of white people have to come on and say, well, what about the Africans who enslaved the lower class tribes? When you're teaching American history, you're not teaching African history. So get that straight. If you got a problem with teaching American history in its full, then please step off, because you're nothing but a bigot. If you cannot teach the history of Blacks, Native Americans, Latinos, Asians, Muslims, Jewish people in this nation, including the fact that many of these groups were persecuted by white people, slaved by white people, shoved onto reservations by white people, slammed into internment camps by white people, without making some equivalent to some foreign country that has nothing to do with American history, then maybe you better be asking yourself how much of a bigot you really are. Because teaching the history of this nation does not teach a child to feel bad about themselves simply because this color of their skin. But refusing to teach the history of every color of skin in this nation, that does make brown and black children feel bad, because you are rejecting who they are. History is not there to make somebody feel bad. It's there to let a people know where they came from, who their ancestors was. And if their ancestors were bad, then how to avoid ever being like them. That isn't a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing for a white child to strive to be not racist. It isn't a bad thing to have a white child see slavery as something bad. It isn't a bad thing to have a child see putting an indigenous people on a reservation and giving them free disease-ridden blankets is bad. What is a bad thing is if the children take from that the fact that their white race had a right to do that, because you refuse to teach the history of the people this was done to. So why don't you talk about real history and stop whitewashing it? If you want a better generation for tomorrow, maybe your generation of today should learn from the generation of yesterday's mistakes and stop making excuses by examples of foreign countries. America is not Africa, and Africa is not America. And if you want to use that equivalence, let's use it this way. If the African people sold their own people to white people, then why didn't those white people do the right thing and emancipate those African people and allow them to become a member of the American society? like they did to the white prisoners who were sent over here as slaves. Oh, you missed that part of the history now, didn't you? Now, we talk about black slavery. We talk about dark-skinned slavery. But we forget to add that many people from Europe who were caught, say, stealing food, or something as simple as that, to survive, cattle rustling, whatever it may have been, who was sent to America as prisoners to serve as indentured slaves. Now, an indentured slave has the ability to work off their sentence as a slave within a reasonable period of time for a reasonable profit for the slave owner, and to then be released into society and be a citizen of that society. Black slaves wasn't afforded that. That wasn't for the black man. That wasn't for many of the brown people who were enslaved. That was only for white people. So why couldn't you have brought black people over here who were sold to you as slaves, allowed them to work off the cost that was paid for them with a fair and reasonable salary for working the plantations, and then release them as citizens? You didn't. No, you took it a step further. Your ancestors took it a step further. Not only were they buying slaves from these tribes, they were also going back to these tribes and kidnapping people from those tribes and any other tribe around the coastal area, kidnapping them, tossing them in the hold of their ship in chains, without proper food, without proper hygiene, where many of them died of disease long before they got to America. And those that happened to be able to get to America had the misfortune of being sold as a piece of cattle, property, given to a slave owner who may regularly beat them and possibly murder them. So, you put it across as if white man bringing the slave over here was doing the slave a favor, when in fact, in truth, what you were really doing was probably far worse than anything they would have faced as a slave in Africa. So don't try to use your false equivalence as a means to excuse slavery in America, because there is no excuse for it. Don't use your false equivalent as an excuse for why Native American people were shoved onto reservations. Don't use your false equivalent as to why Asian people were shoved into internment camps. Don't use your false equivalent on why Latino people have been treated poorly in this country. Use your damn true history as a reason why not to repeat that history and to become a better member of the human race in the future, not just society. You shouldn't become a better person in society. You should become a better person in the human race.